What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of GLE. As you know, podcasts only grow by word of mouth. So as you are listening today, if you would just hit pause and go subscribe, follow, share the show out with somebody who you think might benefit from it. We got a lot of great loyal listeners here at GLE, and I know that these shows are helping you because I hear from you, and I know that you probably know people that need to hear this content too. So especially with today's show, I have a tremendous guest who I know has some content that's going to help people that you know. So if you would, please share the show. And I am just thrilled to have my guest on today. She is the co-founder and CEO of For Better Forever. She's a life coach, a John Maxwell certified coach, speaker, trainer, and she's really specialized in equipping individuals and organizations to communicate clearly and confidently. And she's coming to us live today from Prince Edward Island, Canada. Thrilled to have Ann Visser on the show today. Welcome to GLE, Ann.
Thank you so much, Phil, for having me on the GLE podcast. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm honored to be here today.
Thank you for taking the time to come on. I stumbled across your information online and just seeing what you're doing. I thought it would be an absolutely tremendous conversation. And in our first 10 minutes speaking here just this afternoon, I was already absolutely blown away. So I've talked to a lot of people, Ann, and it takes quite a bit to blow me away, but I'm really excited for the conversation today. If you would just start us off for my benefit and the audience, and just give us a little background on your story. How'd you end up doing what you're doing today, and your life growing up, wherever that might have been?
So I grew up in the countryside, and I had lovely parents, and I found Jesus Christ as my savior, and it impacted my life in a big way. And then I shamelessly chased this guy at school. That's my story. I did. He was so cute.
What, high school, middle school?
High school.
Oh
grade
boy.
10.
I have a daughter, Ann. You're getting ahead of me. I don't need to be thinking about that.
But I just wanted a date. And then I did get a date, and 3 years later we married. I was so crazy. We were so crazy in love. The photographer said to us on that day, he said, "I've never seen a couple look at each other the way the two of you look at each other."
Wow.
Fast forward, we had 5 children in 6 years. Yep. My husband works long hours as a farmer, and I often felt alone and as a single mom. And so he was new to farming as well. And so we had these external pressures that were pressing in on our marriage, but then we had these internal pressures as well, because we were not communicating well about what was happening on the outside. And so we weren't fighting well either. In fact, we avoided conflict. We didn't want to fight. We're both pretty agreeable, actually. But we discovered that that's not so good for marriage. And so we had this creeping separateness grow in our marriage. It was like an emotional distance that just kind of crept up on us. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the moment that changed everything for us. We were sitting in our farm truck. We were on a date. It was our favorite restaurant. And I looked at him and I said, "I can't do this anymore." And he looked at me and he said, "What do you mean? Like, what do you mean you can't do this anymore?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I can't do marriage like this anymore." I said, "We just keep going around and around the same old thing. We don't resolve anything. I'm so tired and I'm so hurt." Mm-hmm. That conversation landed in his heart in a way that opened him up. And he started to talk about what was going on for him. And he started to talk about his pain, and I had missed his pain. I think I was so busy caring for 5 little ones and nursing my own pain that I'd missed his. And so we looked at each other and we just recommitted. We're going to get the help that we need in order to get well. We didn't even really know what the problem was, but we knew that what we were doing wasn't working. I say to my people, if what you're doing isn't working, let's try something different.
Right.
Don't keep doing the same old thing, but we do. Our mind wants to do the same old thing, but don't keep doing that same old thing. Try something different. I went the very next day and pulled a book from my mother-in-law's library full of self-help books. It was called Making Love Last Forever by Dr. Gary Smalley. And he taught us communication skills that we didn't have, that we needed so desperately. He taught us that conflict is the doorway to intimacy, as in into me you see.
Mm.
So when we conflict really well, I get to see into you and you get to see into me. And it changed our lives. We fell in love again. And then we looked at each other and we said, we can't keep this to ourselves. We have to share this with other people. There must be other couples out there. They're not toxic. They're not destructive marriages, but they're really struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to call it quits because it's just hard. It's just hard all the time. And so we started to train and to learn more about relationships. And we're still in training, Phil.
Yeah. Aren't we all? Aren't we all, Ann? As a man, I can't believe it's going to be 5 years with me and my wife this year. And, I can only imagine what we're going to be like down the road. Your story's incredible. 5 children in 5 years, was it?
6 years.
6 years. Wow. And,
Yes.
I can relate to the agreeableness. I'm a fairly agreeable personality myself. I actually I don't know if you follow a guy named Jordan Peterson, another Canadian guy.
Oh, yes.
But you use that word agreeable. I'm like, man, most people don't know that word. I'm like, I bet she's listened to JP because I've done his personality assessment and all that stuff. And yeah, definitely a lot of challenges if you're not aware of your agreeable personality. You can kind of get walked over, and having 2 agreeable people, I can imagine would be an interesting dynamic. But you said a couple things I want to highlight and go back to in a little more detail, because you mentioned if what you're doing isn't working, try something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people don't even think about what they're doing, or they don't take the time to even reassess if what they're doing is working so they can make that change. I was speaking with a college roommate of mine recently who is an entrepreneur now, and he was talking about just how important it is for him to think in like 3 months, 6 months, almost quarterly blocks, almost like a big company would. They're looking at quarterly results. But if you're not stopping to take a look on how things are going and reassess, I can see how you get, 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, a number relatable to my wife and I, where you kind of go, man, how did we even get here? Not that we're going through that right now or anything, but, how did you kind of get to that point of reassessment, right? Was it conscious or just accidental? And then how do you now reassess with your husband?
I love this question. First of all, congratulations on 5 years. High
Thank
five
you.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah. We're
So yeah, we got there completely by accident. We knew we had a problem, but we didn't know what the problem was. And so we knew we needed to solve this problem. And it was through starting to study that we recognized, oh, we're not communicating at a deep level of communication. We're only communicating very surface like, and that doesn't give the connection that we want. So when you share like facts and cliches and opinions, that's not very deep. The deeper we go into conversation, the deeper we go into connection. And so when we go into feelings and needs, then you're going deeper into vulnerability. Because if you don't like how I feel, or you don't know what to do with my big feelings,
right.
and you walk away or you turn away from those, then I'm going to be hurt, right? And so it feels vulnerable. It feels like you're naked when you reveal yourself to somebody else. And what if they turn away from that, right? And so we learned from reading this book and others that we needed to communicate more deeply. And so one of the ways that we do that is I like to think about them, Dr. Gottman calls them as bids for connection. Like we turn toward each other and we pull each other in the sense that we greet each other at the end of the day. Like, how was your day? And catch up on what had happened in the day. We take time for daily connections. One of the things that we like to do, Phil, is we sit together in the morning and have coffee and pray together. And that's sometimes he prays about things I didn't even know were on his mind.
Right.
And so it's a really special time of connection. And the other thing that we do at the end of the day is we do the high-low appreciation. What was your high point of your day? What was the low point of your day? I love this question. What do you appreciate about me today?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm sure 99.9% of couples out there don't do that. Right.
We've been doing it for over 20 years. What I love about it is that even when it's busy, and even when it's busy, we remember to do this because it's
Mhm.
a moment of connection. It doesn't take long,
Mhm.
but it means that we're connecting.
Mhm.
And, it was just recently I asked him, what was the low point of your day? And he shared 3 things that had happened to him that day at
Mhm.
work. We had been together all evening, Phil, and he hadn't said anything. And it
Wow.
wasn't until I asked him that question that he told me what had happened that day. And I was like, what? Like, you seem fine and you didn't tell me about this. And I'm so grateful for that exercise
Right.
because that doesn't happen every time, but
Mhm.
sometimes it does. And that
Right.
helps to keep us in the know. Sometimes I think couples, they don't fall out of love, they fall out of no.
Interesting. They don't fall out of
Yeah.
love, they fall out of no, as in they just don't know what their partner's going through.
Yeah, they don't connect deeply, so they don't really know where they are, what's happening in their lives, how they're feeling about what's happening in their lives, what it is
Mhm.
that they really need. Great
Right.
question, by the way. What is it you need?
Yeah. That's so much
Yeah.
good stuff. You mentioned feeling naked, revealing yourself. Well, this is a topic I talked about early on in GLE, how good leaders, I think we kind of live in a society, and we've experienced it through COVID and the pandemic and all this stuff. It's kind of a fear-based society. People are afraid. They're afraid to go against the grain. They're afraid of what people are going to say. They're afraid to be politically incorrect. They're afraid they're going to do the wrong thing and get fired. They're afraid that someone's going to make them do something they don't want to do. Um, I think the best leaders out there, and this goes for leadership in a marriage as well, the best leaders aren't afraid to get hit, and they're willing to put themselves in a position where they know they might get hit, or to use a metaphor. I think of the fighters in UFC, taking punches or something like that, right? When you step in the octagon, you're going to take some punches, and it's just part of it. And I think trying to operate in an environment where, okay, I can't share what's on my mind because someone might not take it right, or might not like it, or might jab me back, right? It's just not a successful environment for a relationship. So I love that you said that. Just being willing to reveal yourself to your spouse, and know that it might hurt, and they might not take it the best, but still being willing to do that, to really let them know who you are and what you're going through. And I commend you for getting to that point in your marriage, even if it was accidental, because most people, I think, go into marriage with the perspective that it's a trial. This dating culture we're in, it's almost like try before you buy. And really, the Christian ideal of marriage is that you are committing with one man, one woman, until death do you part, right? And so, if anyone listening out there, if you're thinking about getting married and haven't yet, I'll just tell you, and I think Ann would probably agree with me, marriage is really hard, even
Mhm.
with the best spouse. It is hard. That's why
Mhm.
St. Paul says it's better to not marry. If you're like me and you cannot marry, it's going to be way easier to not marry, but it's better to marry than to burn with desire and passion, right? And most people are made for marriage. You said a really good line. I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't remember it right offhand, but you said an amazing line about God and marriage, and who God is, kind of in the context of marriage. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about just the institution of marriage, and God in general, and how He sees marriage, and who He is in regards to that line you shared with me. Do you remember the line you shared?
No, I don't remember the line I shared, but I can speak to that.
Yeah.
I think that it's God's gift to us, and that marriage is that, like, the healthy relationships are the most important thing
Mm-hmm.
in faith. So when that Jewish religious expert came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" He said,
Mm-hmm.
"Love the Lord your God." And then he said, "Love your neighbor." And who
Right.
is closer? than our husband or a wife. Who is
Right.
closer to us than a husband or a wife? And so love your neighbor as yourself. But what does that really mean? And that's the journey that we had to go on. We didn't really know what that was. I really think that God intends for us to get better. There's no one else who knows me on planet Earth like my husband, Malus, knows me.
Mhm.
We've been together since we were 16. I was 16. He was 18.
Wow.
We've been married for 42 years.
Wow.
He senses, he can come through the door and immediately say, what's wrong? And he knows he knows something's going on with me
Mhm.
because there's just that emotional connection there. But I think that God uses our marriages to iron sharpens iron.
Oh yeah.
It's like a mirror when I'm looking in the face of my husband and he sees something's wrong with me. It's like looking in the mirror at myself, and I get to see myself through his eyes. Now, he believes
Mhm.
the best in me. It's
Mhm.
not the same for everybody. But at the same time, he also knows all of my challenges and vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
But that gives me opportunity because he can say to me, look, babe, that's not okay.
Mhm.
That thing that you're thinking right there, that mindset that you have, that's not working for you.
Mhm.
And he can say that to me and I can
Right.
hear it. And that's
Mhm.
vulnerable in itself, right?
Sure. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. So that line that I loved, and this happens to me almost every podcast. I'm speaking with the guest before the show, and we already start talking. It's like, man, I should have hit record like before we even did it. But that line, I wrote it down because it stuck with me. God is a God of generations,
Mm.
is what you said to me. And
Mhm.
I mean, I guess I inherently, instinctively know that, but I never heard it put that way. What makes you describe God that way?
Because um that's why we call ourselves For Better Forever. You know, in relationships, we bump up against each other. And then
Mm.
whatever is inside that pain or those poor relationship skills that we had, they spill out. And then I see that as an opportunity that God allows us to change from the inside out, that character development that he longs to
Mhm.
do in us by his
Mhm.
word and by the Holy Spirit. And then we learn to love each other better. And I believe that God has called generations, not just me, but the next and the next generation. So that's why we call
Mhm.
ourselves For Better Forever, because I really believe that my kids, they stand on my shoulders. The changes that we made in our marriage and the conversations that we had around our table, our dinner table, as we were making these changes, our
Mhm.
kids saw it all. Our kids
Yeah.
saw us get better.
Wow.
And they stand on our shoulders. And I believe that
Mhm.
our children, our grandchildren will also reap the benefit of the changes that we made, that God is a God of generations. That's just so exciting to me.
Yeah. That's amazing. The wise man leaves a legacy to his children's children, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
one of the most important things we can leave in that legacy, right, is a good we set a good example in marriage and relationships, and doing, you talked about starting to study communication skills and just doing some work on yourself. And how few people even just do any work on themselves ever. They go to school, they study whatever they're told to study, and they go the rest of their lives doing zero work on improving themselves. And I was guilty of that for almost 10 years out of my college days, right? And I hate to say it, but my back in the day, my Facebook profile back in high school under favorite books, it literally said word for word, "Who reads?" question mark. I was under my favorite books category. But I'm very different now, as you can see the messy stack of books behind me. But I just commend you for starting to study and being willing to do that, because once you start working on yourself, you realize that you are the problem. And until you start working on yourself and acknowledging that you might have a role to play in the problem, you're always going to be pointing at other people like they're the problem. Am I way off there?
No, I say I take me with me wherever I go. And so I have the problem.
Take me with me wherever I go. I like that.
Take me with me wherever I go. And, in the communication, I was not able to communicate because I didn't know myself. I didn't know what I was feeling or what I was thinking or what I really
Right.
wanted. And so my husband would ask me, well, what do you want? And I
You don't even
couldn't
know.
tell him because I didn't
Yeah.
know. And that was part of the work that I needed to do, was to understand me so
Right.
that I could communicate that with him. He wanted to know, but I wasn't able to express that. And that's part of the communication skills that I needed to learn. The big, the big skill that really helped me was through journaling and
Wow.
asking myself and sitting with God and asking him, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What is it that I really want here? And through journaling regularly, I'm now better able to answer those questions that he was asking me, to get to know me better and to stay in that know as to who I was. With every new experience that we have, we get to know a little more about each other. And I still remember when we had our first granddaughter here, and watching my husband become an opa, that's Dutch for grandfather, watching him become an opa to a little girl who was here
Right.
was such a beautiful thing. And I got to learn more about him in that process.
That's awesome.
Now we're talking about retirement. Every experience that you have, again, over COVID, another experience that couples had. Some loved being together and others hated it. It was too much time together. We
Wow.
learn more about each other in the midst of these new experiences. And that know is the know that I was talking about earlier, staying in the know.
Right. I love that. I love how guys and women listening, like, you ever hear your female or women, have you ever felt like you don't know what you want? Because I know that resonates with me, and that resonates probably with a lot of guys out there, right? It's like, just tell me what you want. Right. And I think even a lot of the guys, like for me, a lot of years, and to this day, I was on a podcast just the other day, and we were talking about your big purpose, your big why, your big I can't remember what Napoleon Hill calls it in his 16 Laws of Success, but I was reading that just the other day, and I was thinking to myself, man, like, I thought I had my big why figured out, but I might not just yet. I might need some more clarity even still. There's more prayer and journaling and really figuring out what I'm all about. And we grow and we change, and as we learn, we feel pulled and called, and God prepares us for different roles. So I think that's just a really cool way to think about it, is just really spend a time with yourself, journaling and figuring out what you really want, in order to just enable yourself to communicate that effectively. I love that.
Yes.
So,
And sometimes, can I just say
yeah,
to that too, Phil, when I'm working with couples or when I'm working with a woman, and I would ask that question, when we don't know, often they go all the way around the answer, but they don't actually say the want in a clear and concise way. And then when we do that, because we're verbally processing and we're trying to figure it out, our people get tired of listening and they tune out. And they stop listening. And then you can't possibly get what you want because you haven't expressed it clearly and concisely. And your person doesn't even know what it is that you really want. And they've stopped listening.
Yeah, that's right on. I think that's exactly right. Tell me about potato farming. Totally switching gears. I was so intrigued by potato farming. Many of you may know this. Some probably don't. I actually ate vegan for 2 years, and I became an absolute advocate for potatoes and the fact that they are the perfect food to nourish the body, and have pretty much all the nutrients the body needs to survive, which is why the whole Irish potato famine deal, like, we think, man, it's crazy, all they ate was potatoes, but they were able to survive and be totally healthy on just potatoes because they're the perfect food. So tell me a little bit about how you got into potato farming, and what we need to know about potato farming, just because I'm curious.
Yeah, we started very young, and my husband learned to farm from his father, and it's a family farm. We grow 1,100 acres. Prince Edward Island is known as the million-acre farm because we have beautiful red soil here and perfect climate for potatoes. So our winters are fantastic for frozen ground that enables it kills the bugs in the ground. It's like a natural ferment. It naturally kills the bugs in the ground and the disease. So we always hope for frost before a snow. Interesting, isn't it? We store potatoes in the fall, and then we sell all winter long every day. We are pushing potatoes out into the States, into Philadelphia and Boston, and into New York and over across the border. But we go over into Quebec as well, and Ontario. So we are right now, this is the season where we're getting ready to plant. So we're starting to sell seed here locally. And so every day they're shipping out seed from our small farm.
That is awesome. I love that. I absolutely love that. You know, farming is like printing money, right? Growing your own food. It's basically printing money, in my opinion. You know, it's like a cash machine. You just, you go plant, it pops out, and you go sell it, and there you got money. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It's a science. Our farmers are scientists, but then they're salesmen. They are so skilled and so intelligent. I remember having a guest here in our home, and she was a lovely woman. She after having a conversation with my husband, he left the room and she said, "Your husband is really intelligent." Yeah, I know.
That's awesome.
Because they're interested in world markets and what's happening in Holland, and they're just interested in because it impacts us. What has happened in Russia? We used to ship potatoes to Russia.
Right.
So what happens globally impacts our little farm on Prince Edward Island.
There's a lot of stuff going on with food these days. I think people are waking up to the fact that a lot of the food we're fed in mainstream stores is just absolutely straight up poison. And even the stuff that's supposed to be healthy on the label, right, is not accurately representing what's even in the food. And so, I feel like there's going to be quite a wave here over the next few years. There already seems to be one building up with people beginning to grow their own food, stocking up on seeds, that sort of stuff, relearning some of those skills. Like you said, it's a science, right? Like we weren't taught growing up how to, I did 4-H, we grew some kale or some tomatoes or something back in the day, but most people these days definitely aren't farming experts. And it does take quite a tremendous amount of skill to be good at it. So,
yes,
it's very, very cool that you have that in your family. Let's go back to marriage, and you shared a couple really good just communication tips. One thing that strikes me about your story is how young you and your husband were when you started your journey. And I'm just curious, something I've thought a lot about as a new dad of a baby girl who's 2 years old. How do you, and do you have any tips on preparing your children for marriage and dating? And would you encourage your children to get into a relationship as young as you did?
I love this question, and nobody has ever asked me this question. I think it's very important. I think our children learn from the model that we give them, from the model that we live out in front of them. So they see us argue well, and sometimes not so well, and they see us apologize. They see how we manage our emotions in the midst of conflict. All of these things they're learning from us. Those are important skills they need, and is one reason why I'm an advocate of the family dinner table, which I've never actually talked about, but I think is so vitally important for our children to have dinner together around the table where we can have those conversations. They can learn to communicate around the dinner table. How was your day? What was the best part of your day? What happened today? And I encourage my children to be older when they started to date. But I think those skills that they learn growing up they're essential for their future marriage. And I would have encouraged my children to take marriage courses, to take pre-marriage courses. I have a program called How to Avoid Falling for a Jerk. My kids all heard about that program.
I love it.
Um, and it's a really, like, it's just such a great program about how relationships are formed and not to trust too easily. We're told today, trust everybody,
Yeah. Right.
and this program talks about getting to know people and
Mm-hmm.
understanding who they are. By the way, this program has been written by Dr. John Van App, and shout out to him. It's a fantastic program based on
Mm-hmm.
attachment theory. And so I think that we all need to study relationships.
Right.
It drives me crazy that it's not in school, because what other topic is so important to our lives? I mean, business is built on relationships.
Right.
If we don't have relationships with other people, we don't have a business. It means picking up the phone and making phone calls. That means we need to be able to communicate on the telephone, not just by text.
Right.
And so relationships are paramount to everything that we do. And my mentor, John, says, if you're leading and nobody's following, you're not really leading.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about people. It's all about
Mm-hmm.
influencing other people. And so everything that we do has to do with people. And so those skills of being able to communicate, being able to relate to other people, and knowing how to value people and really care about them,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the two wings of a plane, right? First, you've got the competency. We need those skills
Mm-hmm.
in order to have that relationship, but then we need the compassion
Mm-hmm.
and the care that needs to happen in relationships. If people don't know that you care about them, they're not going to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know first that they matter to you.
100%.
Yeah.
How to avoid falling for a jerk. I really like this. I like this a lot. I love the idea you just shared, Ann, about preparing for marriage before you're in one. Preparing for a relationship before you try to have one. And this world, you're exactly right, it does not prepare us for a lot of things, including how to have successful relationships. And I just think that's such good advice. All you parents out there, if you're not following Ann Visser, go follow her, AnnVisser, and maybe look into her programs. Maybe see if she has some things that can help you in parenting, in your marriage, in preparing your children for a successful marriage. I just think that's such tremendous advice, and even something as simple as setting a good example at home around the dinner table. And I know back in the day, I remember, it's funny remembering back to calling girls in high school or middle school, and like being nervous to make a phone call. Right.
Yes.
And I've made so many thousands of phone calls now. Like, I can't imagine getting nervous to make a phone call, but I still encounter grown adults to this day that don't want to pick up the phone and call the bank or call somebody just because they're like nervous to talk to a stranger. Or when you hear them in that conversation, being someone that's done a lot of work on communication, you just hear how ineffective and frustrated they are, getting all angry at the person on the other end of the line, not showing any empathy, not being able to, get them to actually cooperate with you because they're all worried about themselves and haven't worked on those skills of communicating. It's so funny that I was talking to a friend of mine just recently, and it's funny to me because I was this way 10 years ago. You end up thinking that your way is the right way and the only way. And until you actually do the work to understand communication skills and how to show empathy, Chris Voss's book, I don't know if you've read it, called
yes.
Never Split the Difference. That book helped me tremendously on understanding people and how to show them empathy, and really the skills I've learned in that book have just absolutely helped me so tremendously to be able to do that better in my relationships. And I hear so many people struggle day to day in the way they communicate. Not that I'm perfect or anything, but I just think that's such tremendous advice you gave, is just preparing, work on learning how to communicate, be a good example of that in the home with your spouse, and just deliberately making a good example people are monkey see, monkey do, aren't they, Ann? Like if they
Absolutely.
see you, they're going to follow, right?
Absolutely. And we see that in our children, right? You do something and your child just copies exactly what you've just said or exactly what you've just done. They mimic everything. And so they're watching all the time.
Right.
And so to be that model and that example for them is such a gift. And it's why we call ourselves For Better Forever.
Right. I love that. I absolutely love that. How to avoid falling for a jerk. I got to go back to this because I think people are continuing to think that they can change other people. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate. My mom gave me tremendous advice on dating. She said, you need to be friends before you date. Mm-hmm. And what that led to was being friends with my current spouse and then dating her for only 4 months before I proposed. But, you get to know who they are and you do it outside of the pressures that go along with intimacy. And I think what screws up relationships often is we get intimate before we've done the work to get to know the person and know if we even want to get intimate with a person like that. And so you're already intimate now. And it's like this weird, I'm stuck. I already was intimate. So now I don't know if I want to like go back or hurt their feelings or, you know what I mean? Am I way off there? What would you say about intimacy in the whole process of building a relationship with a potential future spouse?
Right. So we're talking about sex here, right? And so
sex and all things sexual for me,
Yeah. So when we bring that in early in the relationship, we don't get to know the other person. That becomes everything. Our minds get clouded. Actually, our minds are flooded with oxytocin, like hormones that are meant for marriage. Because oxytocin is called the superglue of relationships, and that bonds us together in a way that we can actually overlook or minimize problems. But unfortunately, in a pre-married relationship, when we're being sexual, then that clouds our judgment. We stop looking at those things where actually we have more leverage in the beginning than we do later on. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
But we do, and we have more opportunity then to ask about those things. So every time we go out for dinner, I pay. What's that about? What's going on here? Do you have work? Are you working? Mm-hmm. Are you saving up for a boat? What's going on? And so I want this to be mutual. So you have an opportunity then to have those discussions early. And you get to know the person and what's really going on in their heart and what's happening in their lives. You get to have conversations about their family. That's a really important conversation to have. Where are they from? What's gone on in your past? What is your pain? What is your pain from the past? Because we all have it. And we want to know and explore those areas before sex takes over everything. And then we don't see the person with real eyes.
Right.
So, I like to say, be a detective, call it kind mistrust. So I don't trust everything you say.
Kind mistrust. I like it.
Until I see it. I want to see it.
It sounds Canadian to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just the Texan in me. Kind mistrust. Is that a Canadian thing? I don't know. Sorry.
I don't know. I thought it was an Ann thing, but maybe it is Canadian since I am.
When you marry a person, you marry their family and all their family problems.
Yes.
And so that was absolutely tremendous advice you just gave about this is something I did with my wife, and it was very hard, but I encourage everybody to do it because I think if you can get through this conversation, then you probably have a chance to actually have a successful marriage. I call it the talk. And it's basically you tell each other everything. You tell each other, and again, this is just my strategy. You don't have to do this, but you talk about past relationships, past mistakes. You air everything out, both sides. And if you're willing to forgive each other and still want to marry the person after that, then you probably have a chance. Because otherwise, something's just going to come up later, and it's going to make somebody hurt, or it's going to cause some problem. and some money issue, some financial issue. Oh, their credit stunk. Oh, they had this debt I didn't know about. Oh, they had this family problem that's now this huge thing that what did I get myself into, right? And when you go into marriage, you got to go with the mentality that this is like, I am choosing to commit forever to this person, for better or worse. It's not, oh, I'm going to do this as long as it's easy and comfortable and makes me feel good. And oh, now it's hard. Maybe they're not the right person for me anymore. I'm just going to end it and go find another person that makes me happy. Because marriage isn't about me being happy necessarily, is it, Ann?
One of the most beautiful and profound things I heard a young married man say. So I do pre-married work with couples.
Mm-hmm.
And so we meet 3 times after. And when we met the first time afterwards, 3 months later, one of the questions I ask is, so what's the biggest surprise? And he looked at me and he said, how much effort it takes to think about her.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes work. It does
Mm-hmm.
take work. But I love what you're talking about, is airing all of that in the beginning, because later, because what happens in relationships, you're doing the no, by the way, Phil. And as you're doing that no, you're building trust for the other person. If there are things you leave out that are really important parts of your life, that are pain places or things that you've done wrong, mistakes that you've made, then you've built trust. And what happens when your person gets to know about that thing that you did, their trust plummets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they're back at the very start of they know more, but their trust drops.
Right.
And so then it takes a lot of work to build that trust up again. You don't have to do that. If you air that in the beginning and you get that no, you're rising that trust as well along with. So I love that you're doing that. That makes really good sense to me.
You described that so well. I love the way you described that, and how you brought it in the context of not hurting trust. Right. Like, I think that's really good. I got to talk on one topic before we close, and I ask you the final question. This has been really fun. I could probably talk. We're going to have you back on, because this is if you're willing to come back on, I'd love to have you back, because I think this marriage topic, dating, like, we could dive so deep, and there's so many things to cover. One thing, if y'all aren't following Ann, go follow Ann Visser on Facebook, primarily LinkedIn is one of her big platforms, and you can reach out to her there, email her, whatever. Her contact info's there. Make sure you go reach out to her, because she's got a lot of really, really good insight into relationships that can really help you. But I got to ask you this, because I've been pondering this. I commented this on someone's Facebook post the other day. They were posting about how sex before marriage is less than sex in marriage, and it was from a Christian individual who had a well-intentioned post about premarital sex and how it can cause harm to your future marriage. And we were just kind of touching on that, but I made a comment, and it kind of created quite the conversation. But it's something that just occurred to me, and the story of the woman at the well in the Bible is what triggered this for me. It's when the woman at the well, Jesus is talking to her, and she says she has no husband or something like that. And Jesus is like, you've spoken rightly. You actually have 5 husbands, and the man you're with right now isn't your husband. And so it kind of hit me, like, what did he mean by that? Because I'm sure this woman didn't get up and, have a proposal video and go stand up in front of all her friends and actually get married to 5 different people. Like, maybe she did. I don't know, but I don't think she did. So it kind of triggered this idea. Maybe there isn't such a thing as premarital sex, because when you cross that intimacy line in God's eyes, you are uniting as one flesh. What do you think about that idea? Am I talking crazy there, or do you have any? I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's an idea I've like tossed around. That's just such a like maybe sex is that important. And that's why it's so sacred.
I think it is that important. I think that to become one. And so first you become one in what you know about each other, and you care about that. And you start to trust each other in that, and you begin to rely on each other in some ways. You don't depend on one person to meet all your needs, but you would depend on that person to meet some of your needs. And then you start to commit to them, and you become exclusive. And then that exclusivity grows until you feel like there's something more. That's the way I would like to see the relationship develop. And then you join together in sexual intimacy.
Right.
I think that oneness is all the way around, like body, mind, soul,
Right.
and spiritually. And sex is a spiritual experience. And there's no greater intimacy or no greater knowing that you can have than to meet together in that way. And so I think that it's a beautiful expression of love between a man and a woman who deeply care about each other and care about those needs as well. And so pre-marriage or not, I do think that it needs to be saved within the bounds of commitment. And then I think that gives a great deal of safety for the couple, because they're committed to each other and to no one else. I can say to my husband, you're my one and only. You're my one and only. I've never been with anyone else.
That makes for a very healthy marriage environment.
It just builds trust again. We can never outgrow any of these, if you call them links in love, is what Dr. Van Epp calls them. You can never outgrow them. There's always more to the relationship and more ways to grow, whether it's in the knowing or trusting, or whether it's in sexually as well. As you age and grow, that changes as well. And so staying in touch and in tune with each other and how to love each other in that beautiful way. I
love it. And you got 5 kids, so I know you have some experience with that, Ann. That's pretty impressive. You have an awesome story, very impressive story that is very inspiring. And I know it's inspiring the listeners right now. And I could talk all day, but I got to ask you the final question. And it's one of the reasons I started the podcast is I had the perspective from Gary Vee that, hey, our children, they're going to have videos and 10,000 photos and all this stuff. Like, I only got maybe one photo of my great grandpa, and I could potentially, this conversation with us could be seen by, like you said, generations and generations and generations. Who knows who's going to benefit from this conversation down the road? So with that perspective in mind, that this might impact the legacies of multiple generations, what would you want to leave those future generations with today?
We call ourselves For Better Forever. And my heart is to leave the world with like a whole tribe of people who are communicating with care and with compassion at work to change whole work cultures. But then most of all, I want to leave behind a whole tribe of people who are taking those transferable relationship skills and at home. I sat on a plane. I'll tell you this quick story. I sat on a plane with a woman. I had never met her before. She told me a little of her story. I shared my story with her. We both worked within the court system, in the jail system, and I was intrigued with her. And just before, she had said to me, "Oh, you're a coach." When I was at work, they had somebody come in and do a course, and the course was on personality. And I recognized, I was this personality and my daughter was this. And she said, I get along so much better with my daughter now. And then she looked at me and she said, I think I could have saved my marriage if I had known that sooner. Because my daughter is exactly like my husband. And we get along good now. I was like, this is why I do what I do. I want to leave behind a whole tribe of people that are communicating that care and compassion at home, that godly love, loving as they love themselves, so that they can continue to impact the next generation and the next generation. So powerful, Ann. Y'all, if you're not following Ann, go do it right now. Make sure you share this out. If you're not subscribed or following GLE, go subscribe, especially on YouTube. Make sure this episode gets out to people. This is a super important generational topic, and God is a God of generations. Love that line, Ann. And thank you so much for joining us on GLE today. Thank you so much, Phil, for having me on the GLE podcast. It's a pleasure to meet you, to be here today.
Thanks again, y'all. As you go, lead everything.